This slide is showing the movement from the zygote to the blastocyst. So in letter A, we are seeing the zygote here, and there's no corona radiata, but there's still the zona pellucida surrounding it. So then there's this rapid stage of cleavage, which results in a large number of cells in the embryo. So we see a 4-cell stage, and that continues to increase and increase. We have the morula, which is the 3 days where there's at least 16 cells, an early blastocyst where the morula hollows out, fills with fluid. And this is where the zona pellucida starts to degenerate. And it's almost like the blastocyst hatches from the egg. So if you think about the egg shell itself, the egg shell would be like the zona pellucida. So the zygote or the blastocyst now is going to hatch out of the zona pellucida. Now the blastocyst is ready for implantation. So it has these trophoblast cells and the inner embryoblast cells that we looked at on the previous slide here. The outer one's going to be the trophoblast cells. The embryoblast will be the inner cells. And what's going to happen is this blastocyst is going to continue to kind of float a couple days in the uterus and eventually try to find a region of the endometrium to implant in. So we're going to look at the process of implantation on this slide. So the trophoblast cells, they adhere to the site of the endometrium with proper receptors and chemical signals. You can almost think of the trophoblast kind of like the nourish generator. It contributes to the chorion, which we'll see coming up. So the blastocyst is going to float for a little bit of time. It's nourished by the uterine secretions. So if we zoom in here, we can see that time period. So here's the degenerating zona pellucida, where the blastocyst is hatching. So it hatches from its zona pellucida. At day 6, the blastocyst starts to adhere to the uterine wall. So here's the outer trophoblast cells and the inner embryoblast cells. At day 7, the implantation process begins as the trophoblast invades the uterine wall, the endometrium. And at this point, it separates into two layers called the cytotrophoblast and syncytiotrophoblast. It's the syncytiotrophoblast which is going to start to invade the endometrium. At day 9, implantation is continuing. The embryoblast has become a bilayered embryonic disc, which you can see here, epiblast and hypoblast. We still see the syncytiotrophoblast and the cytotrophoblast, which were derived from the trophoblast, which we'll also talk about on the next slide. At 11, the implantation should be complete. The amniotic sac forms and the yolk sac. So we can see the amniotic sac here, which is going to have the amniotic fluid, and the yolk sac, which plays a minor role in humans. So our next slide is on implantation. As we already saw, the trophoblast cells start to grow, forming two distinct layers. The cytotrophoblast, and that's more for on the cellular side, the inner layer of cells, whereas the syncytiotrophoblast is what invades the uterus. So it's the outer layer as it loses its plasma membranes to become a multi-nuclear mass. So as the endometrium is eroded, the blastocyst starts to burrow into the lining. The endometrial cells then cover and seal off the implanted blastocyst. So, in a few cases where implantation fails to occur, that uterus becomes non receptive again. So, what happens is about two-thirds of all of the zygote blastocysts form. They fail to implant by the end of the week, and they spontaneously abort. About 30% of implanted embryos also later miscarriage because of genetic defects of the embryo. Implantation is then completed by day 12 of after ovulation, which would be day 26 of the menstrual cycle. So this basically tells the corpus luteum to keep doing what you're doing. The corpus luteum is maintained by a hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin, and that prevents menstruation from happening. So it's important that you know that HCG is produced from the blastocyst. Then the corpus luteum is going to continue to produce its progesterones. The hormonal changes during pregnancy are shown on this slide. The big hormone that is produced by the blastocyst is human chorionic gonadotropin. So it's secreted specifically by the trophoblast cells and then later the chorion. It primarily prompts the corpus luteum to continue secretion of progesterone and estrogen. It also promotes placental development, and those HCG levels rise until the end of month 2. And we can kind of see that on this graph here. This would be around month 2 where they rise till, then they start to fall. So at the point of ovulation and fertilization, a little bit after that, there's a slow increase here in HCG. And that HCG is what is going to be detected in the blood or the urine short at the beginning of pregnancy. But even if women do get a positive urine test, it's always good to go in and see your doctor and get a blood test for HCG. So HCG then starts to decline as the placenta takes over and it begins to secrete progesterone and estrogen. So this is approximately the first trimester here, and the corpus luteum is responsible for producing the progesterones and estrogens. However, at this point, when HCG goes down, it does so because now the placenta is taking over, and the placenta is going to produce estrogens and the progesterones for the remainder of pregnancy. So there's low levels of HCG that occur at 4 months, as we start to see around this point.